Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in.
All right. Yeah. Anyway, so are you happy with the election result?
So we're speaking, the morning after the election, and I'll say, I'm happy but mixed. I think one thing I'm happy about is that it was a blowout, and I think the worst case scenario would have been a contested election on either side that would have drawn this out for months. I think I would have preferred a Kamala blowout to a Trump narrow victory that would have sort of divided the nation in terms of who won. I think other things to be excited about are I'm excited for the Democrats to regroup and have a stronger candidate and just kind of start first principles on, hey, what do we stand for right now? What's popular? What can win? And how do we fight back? Because it seemed like the current approach wasn't working. I think I'm definitely nervous about all the things that we've been talking about in terms of, will Elon really have influence? Will is Trump going to turn on everything everybody that he that helped him win? That the tariffs on. I mean, a lot of things that we've been talking about that you've been writing about, they're real concerns. So some things to it could have been much worse. Some things to be happy about, but is Elon really helping run the country right now? If so, that's exciting.
Save us, Shadow President Elon. That's basically the idea now. It's like, yeah, Elon would hopefully allow high-skilled immigration to continue, tamp down on tariffs, and do more fiscal austerity as opposed to rampant deficit blowout. That's the hope, right?
That is the hope. I think we chose the high variance option, and with high variance, there's real risk. We're not returning to normalcy as we mentioned. The Kamala approach could have been. So now things are up in the air, and we'll see what happens. And
right now, the day before the election, you wrote, Kamala will preserve our democratic institutions while she's trying to jail her political opponent, propose state-run censorship, and debank her political enemies. Is that true? Was that really true?
That was me mostly just venting at. I felt there was an asymmetry in how both sides were covered. Not Kamala herself, but I did feel that both parties were playing sort of below the belt. But feel free to tell me I was wrong or tell me I was out of line or. But
well, no, I mean, I don't know about that because I was struck by how Biden's Justice Department refrained from going after Trump himself very aggressively. He was indicted in state courts, but the Justice Department, Merrick Garland, didn't really go after him.
Right.
Basically, yeah. So that was one thing about this narrative of going after your political opponents. I think that conservatives and Republicans tend to see everything from Will Stancil to like university humanities professors saying crazy lefty shit to Palestine protesters to state attorney generals to like whoever their mother-in-law as like one unified progressive enemy block, and that whatever any of those people do was done by the whole left. Whereas I think that the Biden administration did not go after Trump. It was state AGs who went after him, and there's a limited degree to which the administration controls those state guys. Like they're going to do what they're going to do. And state-run censorship, yeah, I'm not actually sure. I do think that I saw Tim Walz propose that, so I'll give you that one. I'm pretty worried about hate speech laws basically like being a backdoor for censorship. But the debank political enemies, I don't actually know about that. I have no information about whether that happened. I know that during the 2010s there was some effort to like kick some people out of like various like Patreon and stuff like that. But I don't actually know about debanking political enemies. So if you know about that and I don't, that you have something to teach me.
No, I will confess to just venting on X after a debate I was having with a friend. I think I was worried for what would happen to Elon in a Kamala win. Maybe nothing would have happened, and maybe like Mark Cuban, just did. Elon probably wouldn't have been as magnanimous as Cuban in saying, congratulations, fair and square, which props to Cuban, by the way, for doing that. But and maybe Kamala would have just said, Elon, now it's time to, join us and let's make this country great. Or, maybe there would have been some, it felt like Biden wasn't particularly friendly to Elon, both in terms of some of the things he said, but also it seems like Elon had, his companies weren't recognized and weren't sort of, it didn't seem like the most collaborative relationship, which is maybe why he was, so gung ho on Trump. And so, I think, you wrote the other week, Elon's one of the most important people in our country right now, and if not the most. And so we need Elon and an administration that is excited to work with Elon, and maybe Kamala would have been too.
Basically, save us, Shadow President Elon. That's the name of this episode: is Save Us, Shadow President Elon. I think it's kind of funny because Will Stancil, this sort of online shouting kind of guy who tried to win a Democratic primary and lost, kind of a Twitter activist type. I like him. I have affection for him, but I don't think he's always like the smartest guy. But he's been banging on and on. Elon's really running the show. It's Elon. It's Shadow President Elon. And what I've tried to convey to him is that almost no one who hears this will think that's a bad thing. Like this is you just hit upon like why tech people are so, a lot of tech people went so hard for Trump. Like, because they believe in Shadow President Elon theory, or at least Shadow President Vance and techie friends of Vance theory, right? Which is not 100% Shadow President Elon, though he's the most important one. But like, yeah, basically, I think that the idea that right-wing tech people are going to be able secretly in control of the administration is the great hope of many elite Trump voters. I think, and that's interesting because I think this is the counter to education polarization. The education polarization has deprived the conservative movement of its smart people. And not all of them, but a lot of them. Like back in the days of Reagan, smart people tended to vote Republican more than Democrat, actually. Democrats are the party of the working class, whereas the educated people were Republican types. And that's totally shifted, totally flipped, since then. And it's worrying because I think that I'm going to write a lot more about this, but I think that the progressive, educated, sort of upper middle class is very out of touch. In fact, Kamala won voters making over 100K a year, and she lost voters making 50 to 100K and voters making less than 50K. She actually lost them outright to Trump, according to exit polls. Now, exit polls have a margin of error. They sometimes get corrected. Response rates are weird, but that's astonishing. Like the Democrats are no longer the party of the working class; they're the party of educated upper class progressives. I'm worried about that because I think that educated upper class progressives live in a bubble. Now, right-wing tech people live in a bubble too. And right-wing, right-wing tech people may feel that they have some sort of spiritual connection with the great masses who vote for the same candidate that they do. But, like angry cab drivers yelling about how much immigration there is are not going to Hereticon. All right. And they're not coming to like
our parties or whatever. Yeah.
Parties. Yeah. And so, yeah, like, they're not. I was going to say they're not going to the inner, but
yeah, there's definitely a class divide there.
Right. There's a big class divide. I don't know that even Shadow President Elon has will knows how to help the real working class. Obviously, deregulation would help in some things, right? But then in terms of just the basics that benefit the working class, I thought Biden was really good. I thought sort of apprenticeship programs. Like, do the right-wing tech people really understand the value of those apprenticeship programs? Everybody says these pains to these they pay their respects to the idea of people who work for a living instead of going to college because they know that college people tend to vote Democrat. But at the same time, like, how are those people going to get a boost? Deregulation isn't always enough. Like apprenticeship programs can really help people a lot and also can build our manufacturing workforce, vocational education, stuff like that. Will they really and Biden was all in on that, so what will the approach be toward that? I don't know.
I wish Biden was 5 years younger or whatever. Like Biden was a great candidate, and I think he appealed to he like thread the needle in a bunch of interesting ways, and it's really unfortunate that it played out for the Democrats the way it did, where they couldn't not only could they not get Biden, but they couldn't sort of do a first principles. Let's get the best candidate possible.
That's right. And Biden made a big mistake when he picked Kamala as VP, which was done for identity politics purposes.
Right.
He promised to pick a black woman, and it was either Kamala Harris or like Stacey Abrams or whatever. Obviously, Michelle Obama was the correct pick. But yeah, so it was stupid. It was a product of 2020 wokeness, and Democrats are still paying the price heavily for the woke era.
But at least this is an opportunity for a reset, a strong opportunity for reset. And so let's talk about that reset. How do Dems regroup right now? What do you think should be the strategy, the issues to focus on, the type of candidate? How do we, make 2028 a very different, and not just 2028, the midterms, et cetera. Where do we go from here? So
I'm in the middle of writing this post. Unfortunately, it's not going to come out as early as I wanted because I have all these doctor's appointments today. But yeah, so it'll come out this evening, I think. But I basically have two sort of less immediate lessons from the election. The first one is appealing to especially Hispanic voters and Asian voters as racialized blocks is a failing strategy. The idea that there's a unified Latino community that you have to talk to and approach with sort of pro-Latino ethnic targeted policies is broken. I saw exit polls showing that Trump won a solid majority of Hispanic men in America, 54% according to the Washington Post's exit poll, which is probably the best exit poll you're going to find. And although exit polls have their limitations, blah, blah, but actually winning Hispanic men in the country, that makes you think about the Republican opposition, fear of immigration. Like, who's coming over? It's Hispanic men. Now, of course, it's their kids will be able to vote, and half of them will be women, blah, blah, blah. But like this sort of fear of Hispanic men is this invading army, military age men. Like, you just won those military age men, bruh. Like, that's who voted for you. And like that was the big shift. In fact, Harris won more white vote, a larger percent of the white vote than Biden did. It was the big shifts among Hispanic and to a smaller degree, black votes, and of course Asian votes, but they're a smaller number. But the Hispanic vote was the big shift. It was Hispanic men won this for Trump, and despite and like Puerto Ricans shifted massively to Trump despite like the stupid comedian who called it a garbage island.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. You like to optimize things. You've chosen the perfect credit card to maximize your travel points, and you always find the fastest route when you drive. Shouldn't you handle your charitable giving the same way? GiveWell spends 50,000 hours every year doing deep dives into different charitable programs to try to find the ways to do the most good for your dollar. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. It's easy to see why the Boston Globe called GiveWell the gold standard for giving. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. Go to givewell.org to find out more or make a donation. Select podcast and enter Econ 102 at checkout to make sure they know you heard about them from us. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more.
What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. It's a bull market. It's a bear market. Rates will rise or fall. Can someone invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 40,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. If I had needed this product, it's what I'd use. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to your immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/102. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/102. That's netsuite.com/102.
And is it because there was just more socially conservative? Or what do you think is why did Hispanic shift?
I mean, socially conservative is one thing. I think that Hispanics vote as individuals, and Democrats stop treating them as individuals. Conservative values are one aspect of people's individualism. I personally believe in traditional marriage. I personally believe that a man can't become a woman or whatever, right? Like they have these values, and you can yell at them, say it's anti-LGBTQ, but more to the point, it's individualist. It is what people believe as individuals. And then also economic mobility. So I think you've seen massive economic mobility by Hispanic people. Economic research suggests that Hispanic incomes across the generations are converging with white incomes, and it's only continued immigration of poor people that keep the average lower, right? If you look at cohort-wise, you see that Hispanic incomes are converging toward the white average, and if and when immigration from Latin America sort of halts, you'll see the conversion in the averages too, because Hispanics are very upwardly mobile. There's been a massive, massive explosion of Hispanics starting businesses. High growth entrepreneurship, sure, but small businesses, which are the majority of businesses by far, overwhelming majority of businesses started in the small country are small local businesses. And they've just been on a tear. And then Hispanic homeownership rates are rising, education rose. Like Hispanics are following the success sequence of the American dream. And it is rewarding them with increased income across the generations. You're speaking English, basically by the second generation, but especially by the third, like Hispanics all speak English, and so the Democrats have completely botched this. They've completely ignored this economic success and conservative values. They've ignored it because they've insisted on treating Hispanics like a racialized minority group. They've insisted on treating Hispanics how Black people have been treated throughout American history. And the fact that they wanted to give them goodies like, DEI benefits or special government contracts or whatever, that's a booby prize in American life. That's not even plan B. That's like plan like D or F. Like that's what you get when there basically some like barriers that are so hard to overcome that they will never be like they won't be overcome in the near future. That sort of racialized pro Hispanic discrimination. That's what Democrats were offering, and I think that's deeply unpopular. I think you saw this by you saw that the word Latinx, or I guess it's supposed to be pronounced Latinx, but I don't give a fuck because, this word is stupid, so I'll pronounce it however I feel. So, but the word Latinx, the more Hispanic people heard this, the less they voted for Democrats. It caused a statistically significant shift toward the Republicans to hear this term. And, the people theorize, it's because it's an LGBTQ term. No one knows that. No one knows that's why the X is there. They hear that and they hear racialized exclusion. They hear someone treating them as a member of a block instead of as an individual, racial block. And you can hear this in the way Democrats constantly talk about communities, the Latino community. Kamala released her economic plan for the Latino community, but Latinos are not a community. They are individuals. They are part of the American community or the local communities in which they reside. The Hidalgo County community, the San Antonio community. That's a community, more or less. America's community. The Latino community is not really a community. And treating it as a community singles out and others and excludes people, if you want to use some academic sociology language here. It tells you you're not part of the American mainstream. You don't stand on your own 2 feet. You stand you exist as a finger or appendage of a racialized block that's bigger than you, and that's just the way your life is. And then, maybe we'll give your racial block some goodies if Democrats win. I don't think that most Hispanic people want to be treated like that or want to think about that. That's not the story that they came here for. Their ancestors came here for. Their grandparents and parents came here for. That's not the story. They came here for the American dream, for individualism, which includes ideological individualism, but just includes individualism of success. So I think that Democrats need to start thinking about Hispanics and Asians, by the way. I know there's Stop Asian Hate and blah, blah, and I know that they need to start thinking of these people as individuals. Ethnic politics emerge from threat. The reason you saw Asian ethnic politics kick out a bunch of progressives in the Bay Area was because Asian people were collectively under threat from crime. Absent that threat, Asian people would vote much more individualistically, and they do. There was an Asian shift toward Trump, although it's harder to see because there's fewer people to poll, but there was an Asian shift toward Trump. And a lot of it was over crime. You've seen Asian voters worrying about crime. But then, Asian people, as much as Hispanic people have and starting from a higher base, have succeeded economically in America. Not all, obviously some people don't. But overall, that's the story, the American dream. I remember in 2015, the University of California issued guidance to faculty saying that you should never tell your students that America is the land of opportunity, because that minimizes the history of racial exclusion, blah, blah, blah. And that's just bullshit. America is the land of opportunity. I can prove it with numbers, right? And I'm talking about like for African immigrants too, land of opportunity. And it's Democrats have gotten away from that story of do-it-yourself upward mobility. So essentially, encouraging upward mobility in our existing system, helping people start a business. Now, I think that Kamala Harris did support small business, but that didn't make it through the noise. She talked a lot about small business. Her economic policy plans had a lot of stuff for small business, but I think that hasn't necessarily that hasn't cut through the noise, and that'll take a long time before people know that if you're a small business person, Democrats are on your side. And so I think that sort of support for, so don't treat people like a permanently disadvantaged racialized group. Treat them as people who can succeed on their own 2 feet, because it's largely true. Obviously, black people may be different because, there's at least black people who aren't descended from recent immigrants. ADOS, if you will, to use one of these neologisms. That's different. And so black people still vote 90% for Democrats, right? Although Trump made a little bit of inroads with black men. I think something like maybe 20% of black men did vote for Trump, and then like 7% of black women, or 3%, some ridiculously small number of black women voted for Trump. But then some black men did. So there was some inroads, but overall, largely, black people do vote still as a homogeneous racial bloc in support of the Democrats. And so Democrats' messaging to black people has to be different than their messaging to Hispanics and Asians. And basically, their message for black people should be different than a different message. There should be a special message for black people, and then a message for overall people, including black people, but including everybody. So that's the best I can come up with, because, of course, when you have a minority like black people that votes 90% Democrat, that's part of your base, right? You have to cater to that base in some way. But, and that's unavoidable, right? But then at the same time, that can't be your dominant message. You can't just cookie cutter, copy that approach and, apply that to every quote unquote community. And so that's my first suggestion. First, before we go to number 2, what do you think about this? Am I full of crap here?
Well, I just want to echo that from personal experience. My mom is Hispanic. She's an immigrant from Colombia, and her siblings moved to Miami, moved to Florida, and they're all Trump. Them and their family are all Trump supporters. One of them actually works for the RNC on behalf of the Hispanic division, and doing communication stuff. So they would echo everything you just said. And it seems like what you're recommending is accelerating this shift from sort of, race-based sort of, identity politics to more class-based approach and a focus on economic opportunities. Is that a good summary of where you think the party needs to go?
I would say class-based, yes, but a lot of Democrats, a lot of times when they hear class-based stuff, they think about unions. Union support has been massively eroding. Some unions some prominent unions refuse to support the Democrats. Union support's been eroding, and organized labor is not a big force in the private sector. Most unions are government unions. That means they're educated professionals. They're not the real working class. And this is the most annoying thing that I've encountered from progressive culture. Well, maybe not the most annoying, but among the most annoying is the educated professionals have started treating themselves as the working class and believing that they're the working class because they're in a union, a government union, a teachers union, a graduate student union, for God's sake. That doesn't make you working class, the fact that you're in a union. And in fact, FDR was opposed to government unions for many reasons, but they're not really the working class. And so, they're to the degree that we even have a working class. The private sector is mostly non-unionized, and the unions that exist are often more skilled workers in some sort of small protected classes of private occupation, like dock workers or something, right? That's not a government union, but it is there are monopolies there that make it a little bit like a government union. The overall, like, private sector unionization in America mostly died. And I mean, unionization in the car industry would die if we stopped bailing out the car industry. Like, there's almost nothing left there of private sector unionization. Democrats have just really gone in hard for unions because they think that's the working class. But this is another manifestation of the attempt to treat people as members of groups instead of individuals. It's the idea that unions are your key to your labor community, if you will. And so the working class, back in Marx's day, it was clear what it meant to be working class, right? It meant you worked in a factory. You're poor laborer, usually from the countryside, who goes and works in one of these, like, dirty, dangerous, low-paying factories of the 1800s. That's what it meant. And there were a lot of those people, and they were a pretty homogeneous class. Like, you could just classify them and say, look, those guys, those factory workers from the countryside who came and worked in these horrible sweatshops. Like, yeah, it was a class. Nowadays, and manufacturing is increasingly automated, and the diversity of occupations has grown. Most people work in services, and what that means anything from, like, an email job to, like, for some consultancy, or, like, for the, I don't know, anything medical stuff. Obviously, you be a receptionist or a cashier somewhere, or all these service industry occupations, these far-flung, a waiter, obviously. I was trying to think of cooler examples, but yes, boring. These are all very different from each other. People's lives are different. Their incomes may be somewhat similar, or at least in the same bell curve, same general region of the same bell curve, but, like, they're not as unified a class. The idea of class politics is, we could still do class politics, but it's not that's not a salient. People don't think of themselves as, I am labor, I am the workers, the way they did in 1930. It's not like, I'm a factory worker who works in a heavy industry plant and, I'm ready to lay down my tools and strike. Like, that's just not how most people are anymore, of the people we call working class. Working class has become a name for a region of the income bell curve, or sometimes a reference to people who didn't go to college. But people who didn't go to college don't feel a kinship with each other. You didn't go to college? I didn't go to college either. Great college you didn't go to. Go blue. Not. Like, that's not how things work. And so like, these aren't classes. So I think class-focused politics is not necessarily the way you want to think of this either. I think basically you want to think about being pro free enterprise and pro, sort of individual initiative, success, blah, blah. Basically pro-individualism. And I think that a lot of the successes of liberalism, as opposed to progressivism, because I think we're starting to realize there's a distinction between those two things. I think that a lot of this came from individualism. So the civil rights movement, obviously the famous Martin Luther King line, treat you based on the content of your character, not the color of your skin, blah, blah. That was the message of anti-racism. If you were anti-racism in the 70s, it meant you should have the opportunity to stand on your own 2 feet and be, instead of being treated as a member of a racial bloc. You should be treated as an individual. And that morphed into, actually, you should be treated as a member of a preferred racial bloc and get all these racial bloc bonuses. No, we got it right the first time. Like, the individualism of the civil rights movement was, I think, key to its widespread acceptance. And we need to go back to that individualism. The idea that racism should be treated not as a thing we need to harness for good, but as a bad, racial discrimination is not a force to be harnessed for quote unquote anti-racism. Racial discrimination is actually just something that keeps people from being able to live lives as individuals. And we need to reduce it. I'm writing all this in my post. It's going to be sort of a long rant.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Our sponsor for today's episode is Carta, the end-to-end accounting platform that's purpose-built to power the strategic impact of the fund CFO. For the first time ever, private fund operators can now leverage their very own bespoke software that's designed from the ground up to bring their whole portfolio together, enabling formations, transactions, and distributions to flow seamlessly and accurately. The end result? A remarkably fast and precise platform that empowers better strategic decision-making and delivers transformational insights on demand. timely K1s, holistic fund performance data, and so much more. Come see the new standard in private fund management at carta.com/investors. That's carta.com/investors. Hey everyone, Eric here. You know, at Turpentine, we're always looking for ways to streamline our work. That's why we use Notion for all our internal documents. It's been a game changer for us, and I want to tell you why. Notion is this amazing all-in-one workspace that combines your notes, docs, and projects. But what's really cool is their new Notion AI. It's like having multiple AI tools built right in. You can search, generate, analyze, and chat, all without leaving Notion. What sets Notion AI apart is how it personalizes responses based on your content. It's not just another generic chatbot, it understands the context of your work. Plus, it can search across thousands of docs in seconds, even connecting to tools like Slack and Google Docs. And get this, Notion is used by over half of the Fortune 500 companies. Teams using it send less emails, cancel more meetings, and save time searching for their work. It's designed to keep everyone on the same page while protecting your privacy. Want to give it a try? Head over to notion.com/upstreampod. That's all lowercase. Notion.com/upstreampod. You can try Notion for free, and when you use our link, you're supporting our show. Give the powerful, easy-to-use Notion AI a shot today at notion.com/upstreampod.
Yeah. So I hear that on a sort of, rhetoric or spiritual level. Where do you think that, rubber hits the road in terms of policy, in terms of sort of the for the Democrat sort of plan going forward? Do you think there's any major changes on a policy level, or do you think it's mostly on a rhetoric and spiritual level?
I think that Kamala Harris had the basic policy stuff, had the basic ingredients of a successful policy program. And I think that people don't care about policy programs that much. Look at Reagan. Reagan talked about getting the government off your back. Did he actually shrink government spending? No, he did not. He cut taxes and then raised them again when deficits got too high. But he didn't get government off your back. He appointed some deregulatory minded people, or some people who were inclined to enforce regulation more laxly, right? He did that, but he did not actually deregulate anything. Like Carter did all the big deregulatory actions, right? Carter deregulated trucking and rail and natural gas and coal and oil and electricity and beer, actually, which is why we have all these microbreweries and, all these things. Carter deregulated these. And banking, Carter deregulated finance. Reagan didn't deregulate shit. He just appointed some people who are generally unfriendly to regulation by temperament, but he didn't really deregulate. Reagan just talked about this. And I think that this didn't break through with Harris, partly because you didn't have enough time, and partly because it wasn't it wasn't an important enough message. I think that Americans are not, their chief problems are not insufficient support for small business or whatever, vocational education, training, I don't know. That's not their main problem in life. It's something you want to do, it's good, but it's not going to be sufficient, right? Or housing, YIMBY stuff. That's good and you need to do it. I think that message will resonate and increasingly break through. But you're going to need more than that. You're going to need a coherent story. Rhetoric matters more than policy, I think, in presidential politics and national politics. I think at the city level, urban politics, you pay people out. You pay out favored groups. And that's often unfortunate, although sometimes it lets you get things done. But it's often unfortunate, as we in San Francisco have found. But I think that at the national level, you need to tell a story about what kind of America you want to create. And the Democrats' basic story is broken. The Democrats' basic story of, racialized exclusion, et cetera, is broken. We could be a better country, but, we need to tell a story about how to be a better country. I'm not saying this country's perfect. I'm saying that the things that are annoying people in their daily lives. And also, I think, by the way, the other big lesson I was going to say we needed to learn from this election is that people care about inflation more than unemployment. Unexpected inflation reduces real wages and reduces real incomes. It makes you poorer. And it does that to everybody in the country. Whereas unemployment only affects a small number of people. Even in depression, even in the Great Recession, unemployment only affected 10% of people and underemployment 6% more, right? But ultimately, I think that, inflation pisses people off because it just hurts everybody. And, it causes uncertainty in a way. Unemployment feels like something you have more control over. You don't have control over your grocery prices, right? You have maybe if you work really hard, you can keep your job. You can avoid the layoffs, right? maybe you have some control. But then with inflation, there's just nothing you can do. It's an act of God. It's like you have no control. So I think that people don't like that lack of control. Just like that's why people are more afraid to fly in an airplane, than to drive a car, right? Because maybe it's more dangerous to drive in a car than to take an airplane. But people feel like they have control. Like, I'm a good driver. I'm not going to wipe out on the road. I'm not going to drive drunk. I'm not going to fall asleep at the wheel, right? Like, I'm going to personally avoid the things that. So I think that inflation makes people mad because of the loss of control, and inflation makes people mad because of its much broader impact. But I think that at this point, what's interesting is that in economics, there's this idea that we need to treat a point of inflation and a point of unemployment as the same thing. Like, you just add these two things together, or it's called a loss function. We need to start thinking about, for political purposes, inflation being more damaging than unemployment. We have to worry about inflation more than unemployment. So maybe tighter money is going to be important. And of course, I worry about this with regards to Trump, whether Trump could force the Fed to lower interest rates. And if Shadow President Elon's listening to this, I really hope that he stops Trump's attempts to force interest rates lower, because that's going to be a shit show. If he does, that's the main macroeconomic mistake. The natural predator of authoritarian regimes, by the way, is macroeconomics. Like, the way you lose power is you screw up the economy, and then you're in trouble. Erdogan almost fell prey to this, and so he ended up having to raise interest rates a whole lot. Obviously, this destroyed Chavez and Maduro and whatever. But then, yeah, so watch out for that macroeconomics. Yeah, I think that Democrats need to be able to tell a positive story about what could be better about this country. Obama told a positive story. It wasn't just, hope is just a word. It's something you can put on a poster, but hope for what? Well, I think that, for some people, Obama symbolically represented the hope for sort of racial healing. And I think that was part of the story, but that was not all the story. Getting out of the Iraq War was a huge part of Obama's appeal. And that's why he beat Hillary in the primary in 2008, because he was against the Iraq War. And he was going to get us out of that war. That was really important to people. Afghanistan wasn't as important, whatever. Ukraine, people don't even care about it. But Iraq was a big deal. And people wanted out of that war. And he got them out. And so the other thing was the Great Recession. So there had been a financial crisis, right? The economy was absolutely crashing in 2008. And it was obviously due to the finance industry. Obama was going to save us. And to a large extent, he did. Bailouts really saved us. People don't want to hear that, but the bailouts saved America's economy. Fed stuff saved us. Stimulus helped. It helped a bit. It wasn't big enough, but it helped a bit, So between all that stuff, Obama didn't save us, but Obama helped us a lot. And we ended up having a lost 4 years instead of a lost decade, right? Good outcome. Obama was rewarded with re-election. And I think that people memory hold that and think Obama was an identity politics president, but he was not. The reason people elected Obama was not because he was black. People celebrated the fact that he was elected in spite of being black, which people had thought would be a barrier before that. He broke down that barrier, but he didn't break it down just by being black. He broke the barrier by getting us out of the Iraq War and by promising to save America's economy from a crash. That was what there was hope for. Hope for the economy, hope for peace. That was what hope was about. Obama in his first term governed as a conservative. He said a bunch of conservative rhetoric, and then he really cracked down on immigration. Mass deportation. People don't know that in his first term, Obama deported 400,000 people. Did you know that? I didn't even know that.
No, I didn't know. Obama is the most inspiring president as a speaker that at least I've seen in my lifetime. I remember when he got elected, I was I was in college at Michigan, and sprinting to the Diag to celebrate because he had captivated me. He got me into politics. And I haven't seen an inspiring speaker like that since.
Yeah. And that's rare. You can't just say nominate the best speakers, because they're few and far between, right? Like, he was a great speaker, but Kennedy was a great orator, but they're kind of rare, right? I guess Reagan was pretty good. People liked his speeches, but then so those are pretty rare figures, I think. And you want to nominate them when you get them, right? You want to prize speech making, because those sound bites really travel, I think, including in the TikTok age. But so the substance of the story is important, and it's not. We get confused between policy substance and story substance. Reagan didn't actually get the government off your back, but he said that's what he was about. He had rhetorical substance, story substance, if not policy substance. And I mean, part of the reason he didn't actually do it was because Democrats in Congress blocked him. But he had story substance. That was a substantive story about here's how your life will be better. And simply a laundry list of policies does not actually cut it. Bill Clinton had a very strong story about what he was going to do. I was a kid, so I don't remember entirely clearly. But basically Bill Clinton's story was that you're all going to get jobs as computer programmers. The economy is going to work for you. This is your future. Your future is as a computer programmer. We're gonna balance the budget. We're gonna do all the economic stuff, but then our fundamental economy is strong. Techno optimism. That was Bill Clinton's story. Competent management of the macroeconomy, so you can go become a computer programmer or start a business, whatever. But then Bill Clinton was going to fix the deficit. That was his big thing. People don't remember that he was the austerity candidate. Actually, Ross Perot was there. Ross Perot got a significant chunk of the vote. Ross Perot was an even bigger austerity candidate, and probably Ross Perot ended up taking more votes from Clinton than he did from Bush because they were both about austerity, right? Actually, George H.W. Bush would love to do austerity, but had become the deficit candidate because Reagan's policies were deficit policies, and H.W. had to defend them. So he unwillingly became the deficit candidate, even though he was a fiscal conservative himself. But then that election was about austerity. It's like, we're going to get rid of the deficit. We're going to, and then of course, Bill Clinton later campaigned on ending welfare as we know it, blah, blah, which he did under Republican pressure, but he did. But then basically the message of optimism was not just like, you don't just put hope on a poster, right? You tell people what to be optimistic about. Like, I'm sure that many of the kids on the Diag in 2008 were optimistic because of the symbolism of a black man getting elected meant that America was at post-racism. Racism done, guys. And I'm starting to think they were less wrong than we have said, because in a deeply racist country, would Trump really be winning Hispanic men? Would we really, in a country defined by racial conflict, would we really, where affirmative action has been canceled and blah, blah, would we really see substantial shifts of non-white voters to Donald Trump? Despite comedians joking about Puerto Rico as an island of garbage and whatever, would we really be seeing that in a country whose main conflicts are racial in nature? Maybe not. I'm not going to say racism doesn't exist in America isn't a problem, but the progressive narrative of the 2010s, of the late 2010s, the post-Obama period, the progressive narrative of that period was that racism was structural and is basically pervasive in American life, like this omnipresent force that just oozes out of every pore and exists in every nook and cranny of American life. And we've got to send out the, Ibram Kendi types to expunge it, and the DEI people to just expunge it from every corner of American life. And I don't think that's going to cut it.
Is there a candidate on the left that excites you, that you think represents this? Like, do you think Shapiro is an interesting candidate, or in terms of personnel, how do you think about that going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think Shapiro's an obvious consideration. And I think that everybody thought that that Harris didn't choose him because of lefties who didn't like a formerly pro-Israel Jewish guy, I guess. Somewhat pro-Israel, less anti-Israel. Jewish guy, on the ticket. And then the lefties forced Kamala Harris. I'm starting to think he turned her down. I'm starting to think he said they offered it to him and he said no, maybe. I don't know about that. Maybe not. But I think maybe he would have turned it down, because now he has a chance to go forward. Walz is toast, probably. But Shapiro actually has a chance. And so maybe he's that guy. Like he has a sort of Obama-like speaking style. I don't know if he's quite as inspiring, and he also gets things done. He repaired that collapsed highway really quick. So, and he's a crucial swing state. So I think people will be looking at Shapiro for sure. People will be looking at Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom needs to craft a message that is not just like, I will balance the competing special interests of California. But if Gavin Newsom can come up with an idea of what he's about, Whitmer obviously is going to be a person that they look at. So there's actually a decent number of people. A lot of these people were sidelined from consideration in 2020 because they were white guys, right? People didn't want a white guy. Maybe they sort of wanted Buttigieg because he's a gay white guy, but identity politics really took over. And the reason Kamala was selected is because Biden promised to select a black woman. It's just identity based. That needs to go. But now I think Democrats are going to be thinking, let's get a white man. Still identity based, but at least now, less like picking a white man because the white man is dumb too, right? But at least they'll consider white men. But then, Democrats have a fairly deep bench, I would say. And Republicans honestly don't. Trump is a singular figure. I don't know how enthusiastic people are about JD Vance beyond the tech community. And then most Republicans are sort of not, they're old school fire breathing conservative types who maybe are a little better in touch with the less educated people of America and certainly buy into some of the same, like podcast bullshit, but definitely are not the same kind of, like Ron DeSantis kind of flopped, right? Greg Abbott, I don't know, doesn't inspire a lot of people. So where, and then the Trumpists, the people who explicitly follow the Trump camp, like Matt Gaetz, and MTG and all these people, like these are obvious like creeps, which is what the reason I don't like Trump. He pulls all the worst people to his orbit. And then you've got, I don't know, and the guys like Dan Crenshaw and Tom Cotton and these sort of like, those are not aligned with the Trump camp. So I don't know what the Democrats have a deep bench because they're a strong party, they're a unified party. And as a strong party and unified party, they need to change their fundamental message. Identity politics, got to go. Inflation, got to worry about that. But I think Democrats will have Biden did actually beat inflation. And it's going to take people a while to realize that if Trump raises inflation again, Democrats will have a chance. And they'll be like, hope for low inflation, right? Like, remember Biden? He beat inflation. Trump raised it again. So if Trump raised inflation, I think that could really hurt Republicans. And I think that unless Shadow President Elon restrains him, Trump may do things that increase inflation a lot.
Let's go back to this prompt of if we could tell if stateless Shadow President Elon is listening. We talked in what could we put in his ear to tell Trump? We talked about interest rates. What are the other things? Of course, we could talk about tariffs. We could talk about don't deport people en masse. What are the things that you think are most important for him to do?
Yeah. So obviously, interest rates can't be forced to lower. Inflation will spike. Deregulation, I'm sure he's already going to do that. Focus on that. Housing deregulation, that's going to be important. Land use. Focus on NEPA. Not just whatever. I mean, obviously, SpaceX has been NEPA'd before. So nerfing NEPA would be really useful for Shadow President Elon to do. Let's see. High skilled immigration. It's got to be important. And that's I think that maybe racial depolarization will make Republicans less worried about that. But Elon certainly exists in the tech business and knows how important skilled immigrants are to America's technological stuff. So that's I think what Shadow President Elon should do, all that stuff. Whether he will or not is another question. I think that, we like to think that Elon is a very business-focused guy, and he thinks about business. But then I think that to some degree he's very caught up in culture war stuff. Once you've made $200 billion, like you move on to the next rung of Maslow's hierarchy, to self-actualization, which we've learned means shit posting. And I think a lot of Elon's behavior in politics has been driven not necessarily by like over-regulation of Elon's businesses, whatever, although that certainly didn't help, right? But I think a lot of it is just culture war stuff. I think his kid is trans. He's mad about that. He's mad about a lot of stuff. Mad about wokeness, and I think a lot of his actions will be culture war related, which Trump totally agrees with. And then I also think Shadow President Elon may have a shelf life. Like unless Trump dies in office pretty soon and JD Vance takes over, in which case Shadow President Elon could remain. But I think that Trump is not going to tolerate Shadow President Elon for very long, unless as long as he's alive. So I think that Shadow President Elon may have a shelf life here. So I think it's in the first year where it's really going to matter a lot.
We talked about how the Clinton election was one major word was austerity. The Obama election, one major theme was Iraq. What do we think, looking back at this election, the major story will be that guided so many voters for Trump? Is it a repeal of wokeness? Is it immigration? Is it something else?
I mean, immigration and inflation are the two things.
Say it again.
Immigration and inflation are the two things. Those are the two big things, I think. And I don't know. I'm not a political scientist. I don't know that I don't know that I can tell you definitively that that's what matters. People may be using those as proxies for being upset about culture wars. People may just use that as proxy for not liking Kamala Harris as a person, or just the lingering anger over wokeness, or it may be that those really matter a lot. Like I think if you just look at the polls, immigration and inflation dominate what everybody says is the most important issue, and those people voted for Trump. I think that inflation had reduced a lot in salience by the time of the election. It left a bad taste in people's mouth, but I think the salience of it was far reduced. But I think that immigration's got to be a big one. So I think that Democrats have to pivot to encouraging legal immigration and then being anti, like they got to fix the asylum thing. And fortunately, Trump has sort of created an opening for them to do that, because he hasn't really yet proposed to fix the asylum law that is the root cause of all this. He's just taking executive actions to sort of stanch the flow of people across the border, but he hasn't really addressed the fundamental root of the problem. So Democrats could maybe flank him by doing that. But I think ultimately what the Democrat story is going to be in 2028 will be based on whatever Trump does that's a mistake. If Trump makes big mistakes, and Trump is an old guy, and he has some dumb ideas, and he surrounds himself with a lot of the worst people. If Trump makes big mistakes, such as a return of inflation, such as crashing the economy some other way, such as stoking some sort of mass conflict, fighting, if Trump spends his whole time like fighting with the military, or trying to like change the electoral system so nobody can vote or whatever, like if he does these things, the people will be angry about those, and Democrats can run on a reaction to those things, just as Obama ran on a reaction to the financial crisis in the Iraq War, just as Bill Clinton ran as a reaction to deficits, just as Trump ran as a reaction to inflation, immigration, right? Or the whatever. Like people run just as Reagan ran as a reaction to like overbearing government and inflation and things like that, and the Soviet Union. So and also there's the possibility we might see a world war, in which case all these things are moot. And we can talk about that on another episode.
Just so that we end on a more optimistic note, although that is a good cliffhanger, I just want to send, and we could do an episode on this too, but let's just say a word about, or a couple minutes about San Francisco, because there was did we flip the supervisors? It seems like there was a big moderate win last night, and maybe we should have our good friend Michael Lai or someone.
Bilal Mahmoud won. My guy won. We had Bilal Mahmoud fundraisers at my house.
Amazing. Why should people be? We could do a whole episode on this at some point, but why should people be excited about what changes do we expect to happen now?
I think I could possibly get us a really good guest for that.
Amazing. Yeah, let's do it.
Gary Tan.
Oh, that'd be great.
Gary Tan's the best. Or at least definitely Sachin Agarwal, who's another like sort of college friend of mine who runs GrowSF. Anyway, people are pissed at the progressives, and they kicked out Dean Preston. They gave Aaron Peskin the boot. Chan lost, like a bunch of, I think Jackie Fielder was the only real major progressive victory on the Board of Supervisors.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and erictornberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.